Glad you're here. God has something in store for us every time we come together. And I love meeting with the people of God, the house of God, but most of all, meeting with the Holy Spirit, the presence of God, coming and doing and impacting our lives in ways that we never could on our own, trying to accomplish on our own. He can do in just moments of time as we surrender to Him and allow Him to do it. Vanessa mentioned just a little bit about the Thanksgiving coming up in November. We do want you to be thinking forward about that and about what God would lay on your heart to do. And we intend to make this kind of an annual event where we do something that impacts in our community, but something that would say to the community, that's the people of Grace Place. That's how they are. That's their hearts, and that must be something that they were involved in. Today we want to talk to you about enjoying the ride. Now, all of us have been on these road trips. Grew up in a family where every summer we took a road trip from Arizona up to Odessa, Texas, and that was quite a drive. And so my parents tried to figure out things to entertain us on the ride up. You know, any of you play car bingo at all, like in some of these trips? And of course, this was before video recorders and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, the entertainment was kind of, had to be invented. We had to come up with things. We looked forward to stopping at places like Stuckey's. Anyone remember Stuckey's? All right, just great. You know, you go in there, and they had, sometimes ice cream, but certainly like candies. One of my favorites that they had at Stuckey's was the old turtles. You know, they have pecans and chocolate and caramel. It was just unbelievable. And so we would make these stops. We anticipated certain places that we were going to, but we weren't always enjoying the ride as a family. But you know what I'm talking about? Sometimes, there's a little upset. There's some fighting. Sometimes my parents pulled over just to separate my brother and I, and there was a little contention sometimes because a long drive, and there were times where we made trips. We made one trip, I remember, across the desert without an air conditioner. That's not much fun. So my mom had come up with a creative solution. We had an ice chest, and she had a couple of wash rags. She'd wring those things out and throw them on our head, and we were going along with the air conditioner, the 440, 4 windows down, 40 miles an hour, whatever. And we're getting that air conditioning coming in that way. Very inventive, very creative. But sometimes, how many of you know what I'm talking about? You're driving along, but you're not really enjoying the ride, are you? I was thinking as I was preparing for today, how many things have changed in the church world? So much has changed, with growing up in the church. Just to mention a few things, the pastors used to preach from behind these huge boxes, My dad was a pastor, and he was tall and slender, so we could see him, but we had certain guest speakers that it was hard to kind of see much more than about right there. These big pulpits were huge, and these guys were not always as tall that they loomed over them. And as a kid, I loved going back and checking out. It was like an archaeological dig going back behind those, pulpits and seeing all the ancient stuff that was in there. You just never knew going through them. They were huge, and they carried a lot of stuff. Just, whatever people couldn't find to put on the stage somewhere else, they would throw into that box that the preacher was preaching behind. We've gotten rid of those things. We have, pastors are, I think, communicating in ways that are so dynamic today and impactful. And I really think in many ways the preaching has got so much better in a lot of situations because they are able to communicate and articulate, and they have PowerPoint. They have all kinds of things that we didn't have in the church growing up. One of the things I remember about my church growing up is we dressed up for church. I came to church. It was just like that was the required, kind of wardrobe that you put on. The 3-piece suit, had the vest and the nice shirt and the tie and, the pants and nice pair of shoes, all polished up and shined up and everything like that. And I want to tell you, man, living in warm climate areas all of my life, I am grateful the church has gone a little more casual. How many of you are grateful for that? How many of you ladies say, man, I'm glad I'm not wearing my high heels today? Is that right? It's just, there are things that have changed. We have so many tools available to us today that we didn't have when I was growing up. We have, tools online. We have instant access to the Bible. We have some great blogs that are being posted on a regular basis for Christians that are teaching us theology and breaking things down for us, daily devotions, and a lot of things that just were not as accessible to us when I was growing up. I told the story last night kind of interesting church change, stuff that was going on. I can remember when, it was kind of taboo. There was nothing hanging on the outside walls or anything for women to come to church in pants. It was kind of just an unwritten rule that you needed to wear a skirt or a dress if you came to church. Now, I don't know how many of you are here that remember that far back, but anyway, that was going on, and I can, that wasn't like universally practiced in every single church, but it was just kind of an unwritten rule, and ladies kind of felt uncomfortable. I remember in our church, my dad had pronounced, you guys can come casual if you want, and on Wednesday nights, a lot of times the ladies would, because there was different activities going on Wednesday night, kids programs and things like that they were involved in. But as really people were struggling with that journey, and so there was a well-known minister at that time, and he wrote an article, and he wrote it in one of the great, Pentecostal circulated magazines, and the article's title was "Women's Pants Are Not Men's Apparel." That was the title of the article. Okay, so to show you how controversial this was, in years back, I was in Bible school at the time, and our team, I was in a band. We were called the Voices of Praise. Isn't that great? Really great name. It was about 9 of us, the band, and then the vocals and stuff. We were outstanding. You would want to get our album if we ever made one. There was 4 of us, kind of a quartet, but more like the Imperials or something like that. We sang a lot of that kind of stuff. We're nowhere near their caliber, but we were good. We were excellent. I digress. We were in Oklahoma when that article came out. And we were in a very formal, high church kind of a situation. And we were all in our suits and ties, and we all wore black suits and ties, and we were all dressed up and ready to go. And we had finished setting the stage, and someone had told us the pastor would like to meet with us. So we're heading down the hallway to meet with the pastor, and we hear this ruckus going on in his office. And I see him come out the door with all of those Pentecostal evangelists where that article was written, "Women's Pants Are Not Men's Apparel," and that was front page. And he had them like this, a big stack of them, because they handed them out at church. And he walked across the aisle, and there was a trash can, and he threw them in the trash can. And in a moment, behind him came his secretary out like this, like she had done something bad by delivering him to his office. I remember times like that and how much change has happened in the church. And I'm so grateful for all of the change that has happened that's been good. And not every change, of course, has been, the greatest thing in the world. But there have been some tremendous changes in church, how we approach church, how we think about church, and how we do church. That has been so awesome and so incredible. I'm so grateful for it. And yet, I can say this with all confidence, and you know it to be true as well, that for all the changes that have taken place, for all of these advances that have been good, the good things that have happened, we're still holding on to things that hold us back. We're still holding on to things that hold us back. Our sticky statement for today, and you know the rule here, if you have emails to answer after this, if you need to leave early or whatever, this is it. If you think you understand the whole message by this sticky statement, you're welcome to go, but if you want to stick around, we're going to dig into this a little bit. But the sticky statement for today is, if you are not enjoying the ride, it is because you are driving. If you're not enjoying the ride, it's because you are driving. All right? Here's what we're going to discover today. Most of the things that you and other people resist about the church are things that the church should resist. Most of the things that you resist about the church and others may resist about the church are likely things that the church needs to be resisting as well. If you're not enjoying the ride, the chances are that you're not doing it right, and so we might start with a little refresher course before we completely jump in here to what Jesus asked us to do. And that might give us a little bit of the priority of how we're supposed to be functioning as a church. And here it was broken down, really 3 things Jesus said we should do. We should love God, we should love one another, we should love our enemies. We should love God, we should love one another, and we should love our enemies. Now, what I have heard, and you have heard this too, so I'm kind of speaking it, but as I'm talking, you're going to put a face to this. You've heard people say this, right? Coworkers, family members, friends, people in your life, you've heard say things just like this about Christians. Have you ever heard somebody say, Christians are not very loving? They're kind of just, they're not very kind. Remember a show that came out years ago, Cheers, and the song was, everybody wants to go, you all want to go where everybody knows your name, everybody treats you the same. It's not always that way around church, around Christians. I've heard people say about Christians that Christians, my problem with Christians is that they say one thing and they do another. Now you may have heard them say it this way, Christians are hypocrites. Same thing. They say something, but they do something. They want me to do X, Y, and Z, but they are doing the same things I'm doing, right? I've heard people say about Christians that I don't really believe. They say they hate the sinner, they hate the sin, and they love the sinners, but I don't really believe that. I feel because of my choices, because of my lifestyle, or because of where I am right now, they hate me. Not just the things that they say are sinful. They really don't like me. I've heard people that are not Christians say things like, thing about Christians is they really enjoy arguing. They just want to argue all the time. But I don't ever see them out in the community helping and volunteering where there's situations that we're doing stuff to make a difference in our community. Maybe you've heard in those who have a profession in restaurants and cafes, you may have heard this one that I've heard, Christians don't tip, or they don't tip well. Jesus said, love God, love one another, love your enemies. Now here's the question that I think we need to look in the mirror and ask ourselves this morning. And it is, why doesn't everybody want to go to church? Why doesn't everybody in America want to go to church? Why is it that everybody doesn't want to go? I love church. I love coming together with God's people. I don't understand why everybody doesn't want to go to church in America. Who would not want to be a part of a community that loves one another? A community that forgives one another? A community where it is all about improving the community, one individual at a time. A community where there's no gossip, there's just encouragement. A community where you could fall down flat in a very public way, and you can't wait to get to that place because everybody there, even though they know you fell down and they know it was very public, they can't wait to hug you, to lift you up, to encourage you, to help you. Who wouldn't want to be a part of a community like that? How is it that the irresistible, the Church of Jesus Christ, has become resistible in the world we live in today? How is the irresistible become resistible? How is it that what should be most magnetic and attractive has become most unattractive and unimportant in the life of people around us in the communities? I believe we can go back to the fact we're not loving God, loving one another, and loving our enemies. Why is that? Well, I want to propose to you this morning that what we get caught up in is what I would title, for the sake of our series on the summer road trip, I'm going to title it, The Sacred Driving Systems. Sacred driving systems, the religious kind of sacred driving systems that are in place. They have 4 components in the religious driving systems. And here they are. Number 1, there are sacred stops. Stuckies, always. No. Sacred stops, places that you can only stop. You're not allowed to stop anywhere else. You're not allowed to have church there. You're not allowed to talk about God there. You're not allowed to say something there. There are sacred stops. Only here. Second, sacred road signs. You got to follow those road signs. Not those. Those are for somebody else. You follow these road signs. And then there are sacred interpreters. Let me interpret the road signs for you. It's not really saying one way. It's saying there is one way. Oh, that's so much different. And then there's always sincere followers. Those who've fallen into the system and just kind of follow along as the sacred interpreters might lead. Okay? Those are the four components. And we call that toxic faith. Toxic faith. The religious driving systems, here's what they do. They grant extraordinary power to sacred interpreters in sacred places who determine the meaning of sacred signs for the sincere followers. Read it to you one more time. It grants extraordinary power to sacred interpreters in sacred places who determine the meaning of sacred signs for all the sincere followers. Now you might ask, and you're intellectually thinking about this, hey, why isn't what we're doing here, how's that any different than what you're talking about? The difference only is Jesus. Jesus has to be head of the church. A Christian church, that church that just says Christian on the outside door and is being led by a religious driving system or a sacred system like that, is not at all letting Christ be the Lord and the leader. He's the one that makes all the difference. We go to him. He speaks to us. He talks to us. He ministers to us. We talk about the priesthood of the believers. God speaks to you as well as speaks to me. God loves you, and he cares about you, and he speaks to you through his word. He speaks to you through his servants. He speaks to you through your day-to-day lives. He speaks to you in your still small voice. And he is the driver in that particular scenario. The arrival of Jesus, it signaled the end of these sacred driving systems and the beginning of something entirely new, something brand new. Jesus brought it all to a head and started by telling them that I'm bringing you something brand new. I'm breaking down that old religious system, and I am bringing you a new way to live. Something new, not just for the Jewish people, but something new for everyone who is open to receiving him and making him the Lord and the leader of their life. And that something new it marked the beginning of a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Lawrence, a few weeks ago, brought such a powerful message about an illustration to us about how we cannot go into the presence of God with the sin that we carry, with the unholiness that we are, and we have to let Jesus live through us. Jesus said, I'm going to fulfill all that you can't do, and if you will make me the Lord and the leader of your life, you will stand in the very presence of God and not burn up and be extinguished, because I'm going to take care and pay the price for you. The person that you are is more sacred than the building, than the property, than the men who teach and preach. Each one of us is sacred and valued to God, and that's what he established when Jesus came. When God came from heaven to earth, clothed himself in flesh and said, you are important. You are valued. You are sacred. You are my church. Mark 16 and 18, we're going to look at. You might remember the story about how that Jesus came to his disciples on one occasion. He asked them, he said, who do people say that I am? He said, some of them are saying you're a prophet, that you returned from the dead, that you're a great teacher, and on like this. And he said, okay, great. But who do you say I am? And it was Peter that spoke up. He said, Lord, you are the Messiah, the one we've been looking for. You are the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, hey, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven. And he goes on to say to Peter these words. in Matthew 16 and 18. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. That word church is really important for us to understand. It's from the Greek ecclesia. And that word really broken down, it is better interpreted as an assembly, as a congregation. If you're going to think about it as, and use the word church, it's better embodied as the whole of those who belong to God. Everybody, all the assembly, all of the people. It's not identifying a building, a location, a particular leader. It is identifying everybody who says Jesus is Lord. Where is Christ King? You know, everywhere that we allow him to be king in our life, that's where Christ is king. Everywhere that we worship him and put him as Lord and leader of our life, he is Lord and leader there and king there. And Christ is king and we are not. That word ecclesia is meant better or better interpreted for us as the congregation, as the assembly. And it was William Tyndale, when he was taking the Bible and breaking it down into some of the first English version, that he had the courage, the intestinal fortitude to interpret this word as congregation. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my congregation. And for doing that, church leaders had him tied to a stake and burned. He lost his life because he took this word and interpreted it congregation. Why was that such a big deal? Because there were people vested in keeping the sacred driving system in place. You have to come here to get the interpretation. You have to come here to learn how to look at the road signs. You need to buy my tapes, my books, watch my videos. There is no way that God's going to show up if you're asking him to. You need me. You need this building. You need this property. There were people who were vested in that kind of a thing. But the entry of Jesus established a new covenant, and in the new covenant, God opened a way for all mankind to approach God, and there was interest among those who were involved in this sacred driving system to keep things the way they are. But Jesus was tearing all of that up, and for that they hated him. God had another plan. He sent his only son, and he brought this new covenant. Jesus said in Matthew 5:17, "Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Now, what Jesus is saying here is so important. He's saying all of the Old Testament, here's what he's claiming. Everything that has been leading to this moment, this time, and is embodied in me. I've come to fulfill it on your behalf. I've come to be that you can never be. Last week we talked about he's not trying to make you a better rule keeper, right? He's trying to make you a better lover of people. Do you remember? Now, what about all the sincere people who are following these leaders that are involved in the sacred driving systems? They're sincere. Isn't it, they really mean what they're doing, and they don't know that maybe it's wrong, but they're very sincere. Jesus took time to explain how you can be sincere and be sincerely wrong. Right? And here's what he said. He showed us some examples in Scripture. In Matthew 23, he warned about the religious driving system leaders. And here's what he says in Matthew 23, if you want to skip over there, beginning at verse 3. He said, here's how he describes them. Here's what they're doing. They do not do what they, do not do what they do, Jesus said, for they do not practice what they preach. We're going to come back and visit this in a minute, so I don't spend a lot of time on it. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders. But they themselves are not willing to lift their finger to move them. Verse 5, he says, everything they do is done for people to see. Verse 6, They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. Verse 7. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others. Jesus instituted in the movement a deepening or a defining ethic that he wanted everybody to understand. This is how we are going to operate, and this is how people are going to know we are all members of the same congregation. We are all together a part of what God would call his church, his bride. Here's how they're going to know us. John 13:34. A new command I give you, Jesus said. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. Jesus changed the rules. And there's a lot of people that didn't like the fact that he changed the rules. Wait a minute, we've got a driving system. I've learned this system and I know how to navigate through here. Just I'm changing the rules. And guess what? It's better if you're in the back seat and let me drive, because you're going to wreck the thing. You're still driving under the old rule system. And every time you get behind the wheel, you're going to be instituting things that you grew up and learned that are toxic faith, things that are destructive to you. So the best thing for you to do is to get in the back seat and let me do the driving. And our question is, are you ready to let Jesus get in the driver's seat? If you're not enjoying the ride, it's because you're driving. I'll tell you right now, this thing isn't as fun as I thought it would be. Well, get out of the driver's seat. Jesus is going to take you on a journey that you will not believe. It will blow your mind. Are you saying, Pastor, I'm never going to have a bad day? I'm never going to have a difficult situation? Jesus will drive you right down into the valley, right, of the shadow of death. Yes, he will. But guess what? He's in the car with you. And he will take you through it. We talked a few months ago about what is happiness really. What is contentment? What is happiness? The world has defined happiness as I get my way. And as soon as I get my way, that just passes. And it's like, I need to get my way again, because that wasn't all fulfilling. Jesus offers a fulfilling kind of love that happens throughout your life, even in the darkest of moments. You're going to have an anchor, a security inside of you that you know that the one who overcome death is in your corner, standing on your side, able to lead you the next step of the way. He's going to take you through the valleys. He's going to take you through the high places, but he needs to be the driver. Let's go back and look at the old road signs. I told you we would go back and touch on this. Do not do what they do, for they don't practice what they preach. Remember we talked about what are unbelievers saying about Christians? They don't practice what they preach. They're telling me X, Y, Z, and they're doing the same thing I'm doing. They don't practice it. Jesus said, we're not going to do it that way. We are not going to do it that way. We are going to practice what we preach. The second thing, he says, they tie heavy, cumbersome loads, and they put them on their people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. What did Jesus command us to do? Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. He commanded us to shoulder some of the responsibility around us. How often in your daily life, in your week, are you taking a little bit of the burden of somebody next to you or around you and shouldering it for them? Had a visit from a lady several years ago. I get a lot of counseling as a pastor, and there are just things that, there are simple things. To me, a simple thing is like, I'm $500 short on my my bills this month. I'm like, I can figure that out. We'll make a few phone calls. I'll throw in $100. Those are easy things to answer. But then there are these challenging things. A doctor told me, I have a malignant tumor. Nobody recovers from this. You're sitting across from people that tell you some difficult things. I had a lady that sat across from me a few years ago and told me something that's just so difficult and so burdensome and so humanly impossible to come up with any kind of a fix or solution. And, men are just wired that way. You instantly start thinking about how, let me see how I can help you. But, man, she wasn't very far into the story where I started realizing, God, I'm helpless. There's nothing. There's nothing I can do. And we were both broken at hearing the story. She was broken telling me it. And by the time she was halfway through, I'm broken. I'm weeping with her. All I could do was just kind of kneel down close to her. And I just said, I don't have an answer. It's like, Peter and John at the gate beautiful, silver and gold have I not. I don't have any answer for you on this situation. But I do want to tell you what I'm going to do according to the Bible, what Jesus has asked me to do. When you get up from that chair and you walk out of this office, you're going to walk out with less of the burden than you came in and sat in this chair with. Here's 3 things I'm going to do for you going forward. You're never going to have to do this again. I'm going to do it. You're never going to have to do this again. I'm going to do it. And you're never going to have to do this again. I'm going to do it. And let's pray together. And when she got up and she left the office, she didn't have an awesome answer. We didn't have visits from angels. But she walked out with a lighter burden than she walked in with, because I shouldered some of that burden. Jesus said these guys in this sacred driving system, they're not about shouldering anybody. They're about putting more burden on someone. Verse 5, everything they do is done for people to see. See me, notice me, don't you want to be like me? Verse 6, they love the place of honor at banquets, the most important seats in the synagogues. They want to be seen. They want to be noticed. It was encouraging to me when I first came here. We had one of our first elders meetings, and we were looking for additional leadership to step up, and that the guys were talking about things where people are doing little things that make a big difference, like people that were parking further away from the church to allow someone else to come, or were people that were faithful, people that were participating in helping others in every way they could, and they were identifying certain men and women that had these gifts and abilities and were doing these things. It was so encouraging to think through that would be something. And I think that's the things sometimes that are big in the eyes of God that seem little to us. Verse 7, they love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and called rabbi by others. You've seen it. You've been around this, where the title is so important to them. That's the lowest level of leadership, if you're ever leading by your title. And you're dead in the water if you ever go on vacation, because when the leader is gone, when the title is gone, but if you learn to lead people by love, what happens is that when you leave, they love you so much, they're going to make sure that nobody notices that you were absent, that all of your work is taken care of. Your desk is not going to be piled up and full when you come back and all your emails unanswered. You show people love, they're going to come and love you back. They're going to empty your desk. They're going to carry some of your burdens. That's the old road signs, and these are the new ones that you and I are going to live by and what God's called us to. We're going to practice what we preach. We're going to lighten the load of people who are burdened around us. We're going to ask how we can help, how we can be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. We're going to do acts of love that people never see. Think through the last month, the last 6 months, the last year. How many things have you done that people did not see? They didn't see. They can be very simple things. I had a neighbor, I did in our first home that we owned. We had these neighbors, husband and wife. They were older than us, by 20 years or so. And they worked so hard. They both had jobs in the grocery, in one of the local grocery stores there. And she would check people out, and he was a stock person there. And they worked so physically hard and long hours. They were putting in, 55, 60 hours a week. And they would come home exhausted, and you could tell they were just totally depleted of energy. And so his grass would grow, high, and couldn't get to it and mow it. And so when I was mowing the lawn, I would just go over, and they weren't huge, areas there. We didn't have a lot of yard, but enough that it would take, a little while to get your lawn mowed. And so I would just go over to his yard and just mow his yard, and just as an act of love, and never told them. And that went on for a long time. It might have been upwards towards a year before one day I get a knock on the door, and he came over just to say thank you. And I think they had asked a neighbor, like, who's mowing my lawn? It's like, I'd come home, and it's like, And he was half apologizing. I'm sorry, we just don't get to it and stuff like that. And I said, it's something I can do, and I love to do it. I'm mowing my lawn anyway. What are we doing that is not seen by others, but is an act of love? Choose to prefer others. Not always looking for the best seats, the highest seats, the greatest title, the greatest. Choose to prefer others. How can I use what has happened to me as a blessing to someone else? How can I be a part of helping other people? We say this to you, and I firmly believe it. We're still not practicing it as a church. But if you come in here at 10:30, 10:35, you're already 20 minutes late. We want you here at 10:10, 10:15 so that you can prefer others, so you can love people. You can go get a donut for somebody or a cup of coffee or open a door for somebody who's trying to come in and they have a baby in one arm and a diaper bag in the other. And, you can be a part of the solution and loving on somebody. This is what it means to do church, not just to attend church, right? This is what it means to love one another and help one another out. Well, lastly, let God be recognized. I want to invite our worship team to come. Let God be recognized and praised. David Wilkerson, a great minister, great pastor, and many believed had a prophetic ministry to prophesy over the future and things that were happening. Just great man of God, and God greatly used him. He's no longer with us. But I remember listening to one of David Wilkerson's messages, and he said, one statement that he said, and it caught my attention. I was kind of listening and doing some work, and I heard this, and I had to argue with it. He said, not everything you do for God is going to be blessed and rewarded. I'm like, what? Yeah, man, you're wrong. When you do something good for God, you're going to be rewarded. You're going to be blessed. And then he went on to tell me how I was wrong. He said, the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible says everything that's done for God's glory. God's glory. Are you standing in the shadow and letting him get recognized and letting him be glorified? Because that's what God is going to reward. He said, many are going to come to me in that last day. Lord, didn't we do this? Didn't we feed the hungry? Didn't we help the poor? Didn't we organize the community? Didn't we politically get everybody together to vote the right way? And didn't we do this? And didn't we do that? And Jesus said, depart from me, I never knew you. You're workers of iniquity. Because everything you did for you. You did for your best interest, your ideas. It was not for me and for my glory. Jesus recognized when people were doing things for his glory. He stood over and watched people give. He still does it, by the way. He's watching us give. And that would be uncomfortable, right? Offering time. Jesus is watching. So people were like, yeah, Jesus is watching. And they're giving, let's do this because Jesus is watching. This lady came in and she puts like a penny in. Jesus was moved. He said she gave the most. What? Yes, she did, because she gave all she had. And she did it for my glory. She didn't do it to be noticed. She didn't do it to be recognized. She did it for my glory. What are we doing that is lifting him up and showing him and glorifying him? The worship team is going to lead us in this song. I want to invite you to stand with me. Where we're leading here is that if you've been driving, it's time to get in the back seat. It can be this way because you've never really made a commitment to Jesus Christ. You know about him. You know about the Bible. There's a lot of things you like about Christianity. But you just really haven't crossed the line personally to say, I'm going to make him the Lord and the leader of my life. Or it could be that you did make him the Lord and the leader of your life, but you keep slipping up there helping him drive. My wife does that a lot. She has a brake over there on the right side. It's up on the dash. I'll ask her every once in a while, how's that working? She says, not very good. Yeah, it's because there is not one there, okay? You got to let me drive. And we do that to Jesus, don't we? Try to grab the wheel and steer. according to our old driving systems, things that we know. And if that's you, then I want to invite those two groups to come and pray with our worship, our prayer team. All those of you who be a part of the prayer team, come and stand across the front here this morning. Prepare. And those of you who need prayer, want prayer, to get where God wants you to be, in the back seat, and let Him drive. You come. We'll pray with you this morning. God's going to do it.